Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. We often hear that Syria has become the cockpit of Middle Eastern rivalries, with a proxy war being fought between Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey on the one hand, and Iran on the other hand. But my guest today argues that we shouldn't overstate this proxy war and that instead we should look at a historically rooted quest for self-determination within Syria itself. And he is Jean-Pierre Filiu, who is a noted scholar of the Middle East here in France and the author of The New Middle East, Peoples in the Hour of the Syrian Revolution, just published by Fayard Press here in France. Jean-Pierre Filiu, welcome to the program. You've argued that Syria is central to the Arab revolutions and perhaps that it's something that could renew the Arab Spring, which is now in its third year. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, 2 years ago, at the very beginning of the whole Arab Revolution, I wrote a book about 10 lessons about the democratic uprising, and I wanted to revisit those lessons in the light of the Syrian Revolution, because Syria, historically, because it was the seat of the first Islamic empire, is very key to the development of the whole region. And what I am saying is that, in fact, the Syrian people, by taking their fate into their hand, it's really a self-determination struggle, are going to reshape from the bottom the whole Middle East. And we are probably underestimating the magnitude of this change.
How are they going to reshape the whole of the Middle East?
Because first, the Middle East is quite a recent concept, and in the book, as a historian, I go through the evolution of it. The Middle East is only a little bit more than 1 century old, and it was coined by an American admiral, Admiral Mahan, Alfred Mahan, when he considers that the Middle East was at the center of the raw routes and the trade routes to control the world economy and power. So it's a very geopolitical concept. While the Syrians are, with a bottom-up approach, first going to topple this ruthless dictatorship, but then to show that there is something called people's power.
But that existed in Tunisia and Egypt as well. So why would Syria be more bottom-up in any way than the North African revolutions?
You're absolutely right. But look, for example, in Egypt, it's even more obvious than in Tunisia that the former regime is still in place and has a lot at stakes even during the transition. While, because the Syrian revolution was answered and met by an all-out repression, it was forced to militarize itself and then to really destroy the structure of the former regime, much more the way it took place in Libya, and to do it, and that's a big difference with Libya, without foreign assistance. No matter how much there is a propaganda about it, they will do it on their own. So they will be very, very keen on defending this renewed independence.
So it's different from Libya because it's being driven from inside without the NATO involvement that we had in Libya, and it's different from Tunisia and Egypt, you're saying, because there the revolutions ended up working with the previous regime. But you believe that the Syrian revolutionaries will not work with the former regime if and when they're successful?
Oh, because the former regime will be... Because the state in Syria is not like in Tunis or in Egypt, where you had still some missions of sovereignty, of help, and the basic missions of a state. In Syria, it's really a state of barbarity, that is only dealing now, it's obvious, with its own population by bombing it and cutting it into pieces. So it has to be dismantled, because that's the only way to really redeem these people.
What have you heard? I mean, obviously you were in contact with many opposition leaders when you were researching your book. Did they strike you as being likely to follow through on that pledge of not compromising with former elements of the regime in the future?
You know, no matter what is the pledge, the key is the dynamics of the revolution. And because the regime was so ruthless, there will be no concession. It will go until the end. And in fact, I know a little bit also the regime from inside, because I lived over there. I was deputy chief of mission in Damascus.
For the French embassy.
For the French embassy. I met Bashar al-Assad. I met his father when he was president. I met a lot of, leaders from this regime. It's strange because it's a very shallow structure. And it can project a lot of activity, a lot of energy, today a lot of violence. And maybe it's already dead inside, and we don't know it yet, and it could topple one day or another.
Shallow, you mean because it doesn't have roots in regions and provinces, or what do you mean by shallow exactly?
Also because there's no more politics involved. The Baath is an empty shell. There's no more party. You're talking about militias, you're talking about gangsters, you're talking about mafiosis. You're not talking about even. To make a short comparison, Saddam Hussein at his end had still some political significance, which is not the case anymore with Bashar al-Assad.
It's interesting, actually, because when we hear Bashar al-Assad speaking, there doesn't seem to be any kind of Baathist sort of imprint on his speeches at all.
No, but the thing is that, as the saying goes, the bigger the lie, the stronger. They say the same thing from the beginning. Opposition is a bunch of terrorists. We are the stability, and we are the only one able to protect it. So, in fact, they are banking on the fears, on the international fears. So there is not proxy war, being fought in Syria, but they benefit from the proxy support, whether active like the Russian one or negative like the Western one.
Or the weapons also being supplied from the Gulf to
Even
the rebels.
That, when you really look at it, and I'm in contact with a lot of people inside, and I'm checking all the videos available, you see the weaponry is really limited, and most of it, the heavy weaponry, because now the insurgency has got heavy weaponry, most of it is obviously taken from the regime's arsenals. It's not supplied from outside.
Just to get back then to this idea of the national story or the national idea, if Baathism is sort of a spent force, as you're arguing, and when you hear Bashar al-Assad's speeches, he's trying to obviously appropriate the Syrian national narrative. The opposition are, you would argue, in control of that narrative now, and there's really nobody on the regime side who can articulate the Syrian national idea anymore.
No, the only argument from the regime side is a total and blind allegiance to the leaders. There is even a slogan, Bashar for eternity.
And playing on fears, as you said, not just of outside intervention, but of terrorism as well. What do your contacts say about the threat posed by groups like the Alnusrah Front to Syrian Democrats?
No, of course, it's a real threat. It's a very serious threat. But again, as a historian, the Nusra Front 1 year ago didn't exist. So it's all because the regime was protected and could outlive the insurgency 1 year more, that the jihadi alternative could gain some ground. So what I hope, and I have some arguments to believe it will be the truth, that the victory will in fact deflate this jihadi alternative. But of course, the whole world has a great responsibility in having left the Syrian people alone facing this war and terror machine.
Do you foresee Syria, though, becoming a little bit like Iraq was in 2004 and 2005 when, imagine a scenario after Assad where there's a very weak state trying to reconstruct itself, and it's constantly disrupted by militant attacks you know, through perhaps militant groups crossing over from Iraq and so on, and just using these hit-and-run tactics, as we saw when Iraq came close to civil war in 2005?
I don't see that, because Iraq was totally a top-bottom approach after the American invasion, while we see it bottom-up. So you see the liberated areas of Syria as already self-governing themselves.
Sorry, just on the bottom-up thing, is that's a key theme of yours in this book. Just one final question, Jean-Pierre. What impact do you think this bottom-up revolution is going to have on neighboring states, particularly on Saudi Arabia? Is it going to be a very destabilizing force?
I think this is the main revolutionary message, which is why, you know, I chose to write this book right now. It's not an issue of contagion over the borders. It is, you know, a new symbol, and a very inspiring one, showing that people can win.
And a symbol that is particularly close to those Gulf monarchies.
Yes, the Gulf monarchies, of course, Jordan also, even in Egypt. A lot of people will think it twice in Egypt before doing certain things and imposing it on the people.
We'll have to stop there. Thank you so much for coming in, Jean-Pierre Filieu, author of The New Middle East Peoples at the Hour of the Syrian Revolution, and also of a book, The Best of Enemies, A History of US and Middle East Relations, which is also a cartoon illustrated book. That's all we have time for. Do stay tuned to France 24.